Well, I'm finding it very enlightening learning about these small government bodies, I have to say. And given that we're only looking at bodies that spent up to 30 million with up to 50 employees, I think it's fair to say we're looking at the tip of the iceberg rather than the base of the iceberg, which is what sank the Titanic. So I've now got a list of these bodies which I've had a chance to have a look at. And I look down that list and I see we've got Committee on, I'm going to pick 4 of them, Committee on Climate Change, Equality and Human Rights Commission, Office for Budget Responsibility, who in my experience forecasts are always wrong, and to cap it off, there's one called Wilton Park that I've never heard of, but when I had a look it says they bring together experts in complex global challenges. So, I mean, I'm prompted to ask a question first before I get on to whether or not the sustainable financial reporting is in place. I mean, when does Parliament actually properly scrutinise all these bodies, and who holds them to account to ensure that money isn't wasted for the public purse? Because I've been in Parliament now for over 18 months and I haven't really seen any discussion about, from the MPs who are elected by the people to represent them. I haven't seen any issues like this come across my radar. So, I mean, who's checking that their salaries are right? Who's checking that their pensions are right? Who's checking they're not wasting money? We've heard that one of them's chosen some accounting package that I've never heard of. I mean, who's ensuring that the accounting package they've chosen is backed by a company that's solvent and not an insolvent company? And who is actually protecting the interests of the taxpayer here? I mean, Conrad and Andrew, I've met you guys before. It's probably a question for you, and obviously, Janet, if you've got something you want to say, then great.
I'll have a first go, and then Janet, you might want to come in. So first of all, on the sort of the universe of bodies, it is definitely the case that there are a large number of public sector bodies. It's a smaller number than it has been in the past. Mm-hmm. So a series of initiatives from the centre of government since 2010 have looked at, well, do all of these bodies still need to exist? Can they be merged into central departments, the number reduced? And that has made quite a lot of progress in cutting that. There is, but it's still the case that there are a number of them, and the new government, when it came in, instituted a kind of a review of each of the remaining bodies to ask the question: essentially, should these powers and these decisions still be being made in these bodies, or should they be folded into the centre? And additional to that, is there a kind of real efficiency loss and a lot of cost of duplication of these bodies? There are a number of, as a result of the sort of start of that review, a number of relatively large arm's length bodies are being brought back into government departments. NHS England is the sort of classic and largest example, but there are other examples. I would say, however, that there are reasons for some of these small bodies to exist. The classic one is independence of advice from ministers. So you mentioned the Office of Budget Responsibility. Whether or not they are more or less accurate than other forecasters, their independence is an important part of the framework which Parliament has put in place to set them up, and therefore, you need an independent body there. Just the last thing I would say on this, and then Janet might want to come in. It's also not the case that the only way of saving money in this space is by abolishing the whole body. There are significant economies of scale from putting people onto shared services, which is what the shared services strategy is all about, and you can get a lot of the savings that you want from that.
Thank you. If I may add, I think the technical answer to your question is that the Chief Executive and Accounting Officer, an arm's length body, is accountable for meeting the managing public money requirements and other standards, and they are accountable through their Principal Accounting Officer for that. The Secretary of State for a department is responsible for what arm's length bodies they decide to have and how they are performing for the public, and they are accountable to Parliament through departmental select committees and all of the normal channels of the House. However, I think it's important to say that the current government's view is that there is more to be done to make those arm's length bodies more accountable. And so what we've been doing through the arm's length body review piece of work that was announced by the then Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster last year, and also referenced by the Prime Minister, is looking not just at efficiency and duplication in the way that Conrad's discussed, but also accountability. So you've seen the Ministry of Justice introduce their democratic lock across their arm's length bodies. That's a model that we're interested in to see is it something that needs to be applied elsewhere. And you will have seen the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee talking about when he pulls the levers, the chain from that to the delivery on the ground is too long and not direct enough for his taste, and that is partly to do with the relationship with arm's length bodies. So there is a real appetite to address that set of issues, and I think it would be regarded as a fair question. And that's a continuation actually of previous governments who have also had a similar view, and that's why the number of bodies has been reduced since 2010 in the way it has.
Can I just add 2 points to that? So just in terms of the public scrutiny point that you were mentioning as well. So we've got the estimates process as well, which will be sort of voted on in Parliament. So that will have for each department a list of their activities and a list of their bodies in terms of what funding has been approved for them to spend that year. That will be reported against in their annual report and accounts, and select committees will hold departments to account for that. And then you mentioned accounting systems as well. So there's a shared services programme strategy which is looking to move all departments onto 5 clusters. That is going to be with companies like Oracle, Workday, SAP. It's big companies who are going to be providing that service. Sitting underneath that, some bodies may use sort of accounting software to then take the information off those systems to then produce their accounts, but that is more local software. So for any significant system, that would be a major government contract and tends to be a major well-known supplier.
It doesn't entirely tell you with the pre-meeting we had with departments, but we can pick that up later. So again, I having had the pre-meeting, I mean, if I ran a business where I knew what my income was and I was just spending money, and again, I think a lot of this is government money that's being given to these various quangos, as I call them, small quangos. The question really is the sustainability of the financial reporting. Is it necessary to have the depth of financial reporting when actually what we're looking at is how they're spending the money? We're not looking at how they're generating the money. There's no turnover as such. It's simply a handout from the taxpayer, which they are then distributing. So surely you can streamline the reporting to ensure we don't waste money on professional fees. We don't waste money on, as you say, shared services which could be better utilised. If you run a business, you have to make sure you keep yourself very, very streamlined.
Yeah.
And I just question whether you aren't burdening these small bodies with far too much financial reporting, which you could actually make a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And that would benefit the taxpayer, arguably in 2 ways. You could simplify that reporting, and you could cut the cost of generating the reports.
Yeah. So I definitely agree with the principle, and as I said at the beginning, one of the things we do when we take private sector reporting standards and apply them into the public sector is think, is this suitable for the public sector, or should we make some adjustments to take account of the fact that this is not operating in a commercial environment? So I think one example of what we do there is valuation of assets and plant and equipment. I think we do that every 5 years with a sort of indexation rather than forcing people to value every year, as happens in the private sector. So we do make those kind of adjustments for the public sector context. And as I say, I think we are actively looking at what more we could do. I do think, though, that it is worth getting the sort of proportionality in both senses here. So, a change which you made to reporting standards, which reduced compliance costs in the private sector by £100 for small bodies in the private sector. There are about 5.6 million small businesses in the private sector, so you'd save like £560 million. In the public sector, the NA have identified 48 bodies, so the same reduction in transparency and work would save you £4,800.
Similar to a small company not needing an audit.
Yeah, because there are so many more organisations in the private, broadly speaking, private sector, very, very, very large number of very small bodies. Public sector, small number of very large bodies. So you've already got this kind of difference in proportion that you need to think about. And then to your kind of starting point, there just need to be accounting for the expenditure. That is a good reason why we have this quite high standard of financial reporting in the public sector, because they are always spending someone else's money. They're always spending taxpayers' money, whereas small businesses in the private sector often are spending only their own resources.
Well, they are generating their own money.
Exactly.
They're not just spending.
Exactly. And so I think that's one of the arguments for having a high and consistent standard of reporting in the public sector, that, all public bodies which are spending public money should be reporting on the remuneration of senior members of the body, that kind of thing. And that's what the annual reports are doing.
As we know, Conrad, it's easier to spend other people's money than your own very often. I have to say I'm sort of struggling to get my mind around. I've now got a list of 48 of these various bodies, of which I think you represent 3 of them. I sort of look at my history and I think Robert Walpole, the cabinet met twice for 2 weeks at his estate in Norfolk, and there was very little sort of involvement of government in people's lives. So I'm sort of struggling to work out how on earth Britain staggered on without all these various little bodies, as well as the big ones that we're uncovering vast amounts of waste within. So I'd be very grateful if you could explain to me exactly what benefit you think hiving out these small bodies has on the efficiency of government and, if you like, the results for which the taxpayer is paying. I mean, are you better as individual little bodies? I mean, I'm assuming you have your own offices. Do you all have your own offices?
We do now, because we couldn't stay in the sanctuary buildings. So
your own little empires and your own. I mean, do you need to be separate bodies? Do you think?
So, from the Children's Commissioner's point of view, yes, because the post is defined in legislation, and it's set out that there is a commissioner, their powers, their duties and their independence are set out, and their ability to sort of hire staff and run an office is set out. The funding is determined by the Department for Education, and we've delivered our reporting this year on a in real terms, slightly reduced budget. So, it's not a huge amount, but in the current framework, there is a requirement for the office and for the commissioner. Is there an argument that you could do some of the back office stuff more efficiently by joining in shared services? I'd hazard a guess that it would cost more than the 2.6 FTE that we're delivering on as a small sort of agile organisation if we were subsumed into bigger government, because bigger government just has to have more sort of process to function at the level of transparency that's required. But it would be up to Parliament sort of to determine whether...
So for Farhad, thank you very much for that, Michael. For Farhad, it appears that a lot of the legal bodies that have been set up stem from Tony Blair's reforms in 2005, when basically set up the Supreme Court, looking at some of the bodies we've got here. I mean, again, do you need so many different legal bodies operating as separate entities? I mean, I'd be grateful for you helping us to question the main people responsible for these small bodies. I'd like you to load our weapon for us, if you like, figuratively, because we need to represent the taxpayer. I see vast numbers of people with little empires, I presume you will have to have your audit done, you will have to have accounts done, you will have to pay professionals for all the work that's done. So what can we do to make this more effective and better value for money, in your view?
I think it's a very good question. I think that the thing which I would say is we in MOJ do a kind of a continuous process of reviewing the organisations that we have. We've just kind of worked very closely with the Cabinet Office to do a review of all of our bodies, and that has thrown up some interesting kind of insight. But it was always possible to to reduce the number of bodies by doing the kinds of things that we were talking about, that you could introduce statute to get rid of these bodies. But there is a separate question as to whether we think collectively those functions need to exist. So even if we were to get rid of GAD, for example, I don't think there's any argument that we need to have an actuaries department that does the calculations around the pension liabilities of, the government.
I wouldn't for 1 minute suggest we get rid of them.
Thank you.
It's a question of where they sit. The question of where they sit.
Well, exactly. And so the question of whether or not the bodies need to exist is probably one of government policy, and whether government policy dictates whether or not these bodies need to exist as independent organisations, or whether they can be subsumed within their larger organisation. And I don't think it's for us to to give a view on whether that's the right thing to do from a.
That's a question for the ministers, you think?
I think in lots of cases it will be. I think
what do you think? Do you think it's better like it as it is, or do you think it could be improved?
I think there is always scope for improvement, and I think the kinds of things that we do.
How would you improve it?
So I think that, for example, the kinds of things that we have done in the Ministry of Justice to centralise functions, to give those economies of scale in quite a lot of the organisations, is one way to get efficiency. So you don't have lots of smaller bodies with their own smaller finance teams, which means that you have greater resilience. Because if something complicated comes up, it means it's easier to access specialist support, but also means that the type of things that we're talking about in terms of smaller bodies' ability to meet functional standards is easier as well. So that shared services or more centralised functional model is something that probably other organisations could explore. I think looking at the workload of organisations and seeing whether that has changed, and whether that means bodies that were set up in the past are still needed. Those are the kinds of things that I think other organisations could look at, and is the kind of thing that we have done. But I think there is the wider question of whether bodies need to exist at all or independently. I think is more of one of government policy, and I think in most cases, and certainly the cases for MOJ, where we have looked at bodies, even if we have made the assessment that they could be brought in-house, actually our view is that the efficiencies that would be generated from that are relatively small, and there have been sensible, rational decisions taken in the past for why these bodies have existed as independent organisations, and that rationale remains.
Okay. Yes, can we drill down a bit more on shared services? Because it sort of strikes me that we're going full circle almost. We've sort of gone independent, and now we're looking at how we share services, which then begs the question of why did we hive ourselves out in the first place? And I guess the definition of needing to be transparent is a subjective one rather than an objective one. So how can you improve on your shared services without affecting the operation of your small bodies? Probably a question for you, Indrani.
Just to clarify, as in what could be done a bit better? Yes,
your shared services. I mean, I'm assuming you said you will have an audit, presumably use different auditors. Presumably, if you're operating, and when you talk about turnover, I'm assuming a lot of it is actually the definition of turnover versus spend. A lot of what's going through your various bodies is spend rather than turnover.
Yeah, it's
funded by the taxpayer. The taxpayer is giving you money that you're then spending.
Yeah.
So it's spend. Let's get the term right. It's not turnover. It's spend. So the question, I guess, is payroll, audit, office. All sorts of communications, IT, that there's loads of things which, if you run a business, you try and ensure you spend as little as possible on. So what are you all doing to ensure that you maximise that opportunity?
In terms of the external audit, we're audited by the NAO, so we don't have a say in the audit. Who audits us? Internal audit, we're required to have internal audit, and we go out to tender through sort of a framework agreement. And I think that gives us the opportunity to sort of be proportional about, what scope and scale of internal audit that we need. I don't think that, from experience, I don't think there's a big variation in price with external or internal audit, because it's based on the number of days that are required for the audit for seniors and for other partners to work. We run our own payroll, so we have a small payroll system that has a small annual cost, but we have expertise in-house to do that. So that would work out at a very low per payroll cost. And we do little procurement, so it in terms of comms and things like that, that's within our headcount. So
accounts package, for instance, you mentioned just now. I mean, I find with my companies, if they're all on the same accounts package, it's much easier for everybody to understand what's happening everywhere. So are you all on the same accounts package? It sounds as if you're not.
No, it's unlikely
they're
that
they're in different. You're on different one, different accounts
to Treasury. Yes, unlikely to. Michael, we have we're going.
Well, we use the DfE's accounts package, so there are pros and cons of doing that. But it does mean that all the information is there and accessible to the sponsor department, and the cost is hidden, I guess, because it's not. You wouldn't see it within our expenditure because it is a service provided by the sponsor department. So I couldn't quantify what that would cost if we were buying it commercially.
So in your example, Indrani, which package did you select? Did you select Sage or did you select Zero? Or what did you select?
We went for Access Financials, it's called.
Right.
So they're fairly small, they cater to...
Never heard of them.
I hadn't either until we'd onboarded with them, but they are within the wider
They'll still be in
frameworks.
business next year, will they?
They will be. We've done our due diligence.
Right.
So we've gone with them, and I feel like there are pros and cons to moving into, say, using Oracle, for example, which is what Treasury use. We are a somewhat differently organised entity, I suppose. I mentioned earlier that we're self-funded, which means that all of our expenditure, our spend, is met through the income that we're generating by kind of recovering those costs for the work that we do.
From other parts of government? From other parts of government,
yes.
Captive recovery?
They don't have to use us for some of our services. In fact, by working with us, because we are not looking at profit margins, we're not looking to have a turnover at the end of the year, we can often deliver the actuarial work for the wider government for much cheaper than the private sector. So that's really the kind of advantage of using GAD per se, which means we are very careful about how we go about planning our expenditure. And even going for the finance system implementation, this has been something we've been thinking about for a little while now. It was an infrastructure change that was needed because the current finance system that we've got has been in place for over 20 years. That obviously comes with its own inefficiencies. So we feel that by undergoing this bit of transformation, we've had to plan for the affordability of it. We are demand-driven as an organisation, so our reputation, our reach across the public sector is what we kind of rely upon to keep afloat, if you like. If we had to go with someone like Oracle, particularly the way Treasury use it, they would not have a timesheet module, for example, which is something we rely on to be able to see how much of our time is being spent on various activities. That would probably cost us a lot more to bring in than a very affordable package that we're actually implementing at the moment. So I feel like in certain instances that flexibility has meant that Treasury doesn't have to completely change their model, which would be costly, plus GAD. But equally, our reporting is fairly straightforward because we're not as big an entity as Treasury, say. So perhaps if we were changing our chart of accounts for whatever reason, that might have some of its own inefficiencies attached to it. So some of it has to be a bit of an options analysis, which is what we went through to get to because it was never off the table that we would join forces.
You're collectively comfortable that enough is being done to take full advantage of shared services, or is there more you can do?
I think in my experience at GAD, we're doing the best that we can with what's available out there. In my opinion, could more be done? Yes, I think signposting of exactly how to get further shared service support would be quite helpful.
Who's driving that?
well,
who's responsible for that? Because in my experience, unless somebody's responsible, nothing ever happens.
So the Cabinet Office and Treasury between them are
dear,
in charge
that
of
worries
a lot of the shared services. As I mentioned earlier,
Yes.
well, some aspects of it work quite well. So, for example, the Treasury aspect of it works quite well for us. The government property agency, that can be that has at times has been a bit difficult to engage with, and we invest a lot more time and effort to make sure that we can manage that relationship and then the reliance or dependencies that we need for reporting so that it doesn't cause knock-on impact. But I think for the purposes of what GAD need shared services for, it works well. Is there more that could be done? Yes, sure. So on the HR side of things, perhaps it'd be useful to engage with Cabinet Office a bit more. Better signposting on centres of expertise would be useful. So I know there's a lot of forums and groups that exist. So there's a technical accounting centre of expertise. There's RASIC for resource accounts that HMRC run. There's a small and medium department forum that I'm a part of. But I feel like I know about a lot of these forums because of my 12, 13 years within the civil service. I don't know if I would know about them automatically on day one. So a bit more signposting might actually help us make the most of what already exists.
Thank you.